road to get to the side of the office because everything is closed down. And frankly, fortunate this is situated where it is. I mean, you see fairly sprawling and not a lot of buildings kind of around it. You can imagine if this was like in Houston, you see sometimes one of the DPS offices that I went to where it's in essentially a strip mall location where there's multiple businesses on either side, that this was sprawling. But a lot of people in there, we know, as y'all are looking at video earlier from ABC 13.
And we're still trying to figure out exactly what the motive was behind the person who did this. But again, an intentional act leads you to think that maybe something was going on with this person. We'll find out as soon as DPS lets us know. The video from the inside, when we saw from Don Armstrong when he was able to zoom in with Skyline 13, very telling. You know, you see all of that railing bent down in the front, the door, you can't even see the door at this point. Debris has fallen down, and then all that debris, Jonathan, on the truck itself, on the cab of that truck, and the damage to the cab of that truck, and all the stuff that's just still lying on there that came from the ceiling and the walls of this DPS office. And somebody, you or Doug was saying, you kind of makes you wonder if the building is safe to be inside at this point, if it didn't do any structural damage to it. But the way that these offices are typically divided up, the employees are in the back, and you have people waiting, a waiting room on the left, and an activity room, if you will, where all the action's going on the right. They call you a number, you walk over. But the fact that so many people were in that building when this happened, the last thing that anybody would think, you would assume at a DPS office, surrounded by DPS employees, probably a trooper there somewhere as well, that you are in a safe place, and you're not.
Absolutely, and that goes back to, again, I think it's so important to understand what happens at DPS, the myriad of things beyond the driver's license, as we've talked about, and as Don Armstrong highlighted, the place for your Texas state troopers, but so many of the records, from criminal records to handgun licensing, all things. And I just say, Jeff, it is absolutely surprising, but we have all, I think, kind of been a part of that situation and can understand the angst that comes through sometimes going through the Department of Public Safety, especially when you're not able to get the things that you want, and just wondering, and looking at when you talk about an intentional act, sort of what a motivation could have been.
That's right. And when you go into these offices, you have to have a whole file folder worth of things, and if you miss one thing, if you might have it, it's but it's expired, you've got to go back and start all over again,
And as Maya Shea talked about, a lot of people will drive out to these rural locations specifically because you might think they're less populated. One thing I do want to point out, I know we had this video from a little bit earlier, and Don Armstrong highlighted this, you did as well, that it looks like one of the patrol cars actually kept the truck from backing out and ramming again. Perhaps that could have been the intention, to keep causing damage. So without potentially those actions of a trooper smashing his car into the back of this 18-wheeler, this thing could have been worse.
And this was an active police chase that ended this way. So absolutely, law enforcement in pursuit of this 18-wheeler, and the driver, again, we want to mention, has been taken into custody. There is no longer any sort of danger to anybody else in the community down there. What his motivations are, what was going through this guy's mind, why this happened, that's all going to come out with the investigation. But it just is one of these things when you start to look at, sometimes you can look at an accident and go, okay, well, maybe somebody got distracted. That's not a distraction. This is not somebody on their phone. This is somebody who, according to what we are being told, did this on purpose, rammed into the front of the DPS office with a loaded 18-wheeler intentionally.
And your thoughts certainly go out, again, as we've been talking about the suspect and why this might have happened and how it happened, to the people who were inside and who were injured. At least 16 people injured. And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 of them injured critically. We saw the video showing Life Flight helicopter earlier on the scene, taking people to a hospital. So that, I think, is where the main focus is right now. And one thought that just came to mind for me, is fortunately, know, it is a school day. This is not a place where a lot of children are. We have not identified, right, the identity of those 16-plus people. But usually DPS, unless they're extremely young infants, you're not going to see so many young people populated there. But my mind now is thinking about who was inside and whose families are affected.
I mean, you might see, you know, a mom or dad taking their kids in to get their stuff taken care of, but, you know, maybe a 15, 16-year-old getting their license for the first time or something like that. You know, you mentioned going down to these offices from Houston or larger cities. Part of the reason you have to do that is because it's hard to get an appointment at sometimes in the city, so you can find a better appointment slot there. Don Armstrong's going to talk to us again from the Sky 13 over the scene there in Brenham. Don, what you got for us?
Well, the latest thing is that they have put up a TFR, which means in aircraft talk, a temporary flight restriction over that. So we've had to move back 2 miles, and we have to go no lower than 3,000 feet. Apparently they're expecting more air traffic here, and to be able to conduct any kind of a press conference, that sort of thing, they've got to have the helicopter noise at a minimum. So we've been kind of scooted back, if you will. So that's why the scene looks like it's further away. Well, it is further away. I could tell you that a lot of the witnesses, the people that were here when we first arrived on the scene an hour ago, they have been released, it appears, and now the investigation continues on. I did see DPS officers looking at the brakes on the 18-wheeler itself, both on the trailer and on the tractor that pulls the trailer. I don't know if they found anything. Of course, all of that will be coming out in the weeks and months ahead once they release all of the investigation.
And Don, you know, the force,
stuff, as you can imagine.
Yeah, Don, no doubt, and just the force behind that 18-wheeler with all of that weight on that trailer. You know, if you were just to try to stop, if you were going 55 miles an hour driving that thing, it takes a while to slow down. But for that guy to...
Jeff, yeah, I was just going to say it's tens of thousands of pounds that is moving down the street, and you can imagine it's almost like trying to stop a train.
Right.
And I mean that in the literal sense. Hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of material sitting behind you. It's not going to stop even when it hits a building. And clearly it went inside the building, in the front door. I don't even know if he slowed down, but he had to a bit to make the turn off of the feeder street into that parking lot, across the parking lot, and into that building. You can just imagine the sound that it made when it hit the front of the building.
Right, and you know, again, not to do too much speculation on this, DPS is getting ready to tell us some more information. But, you know, an 18-wheeler, Jonathan, isn't something you can just jump in and drive down the street. You have to know how to drive these things. You know, there's the gearing system, you know, to get it up to speed, to be able to drive down the road with these things. They are not easy vehicles. Even when they don't have anything on the back of the bed, as Don was mentioning, tons of that rebar on the back. It makes it even more
into a commercial vehicle like this. We do know Don Armstrong and our Sky 13 crew has to leave and refuel. Don, anything else you want to add before we have to clear you from the scene?
Well, I just wanted to mention the fact that we are moved back now, and of course our ground crew is there. We're going to have cameras here, and they're going to be getting information as soon as it becomes available, as soon as they have a press conference, and I know that that's in the works as we speak, and that will be happening, I'm sure, within the hour. And then you can see in the middle of your screen at the back of the 18-wheeler on the trailer there, they're still looking at brakes on that trailer itself. So that is a source of contention that will be in the investigation. Back to you guys.
Okay, no doubt about that. Our Maya Shea getting prepared to continue our coverage from the scene on the ground. Took her and her photographer a little bit of time to get there, just simply because of the traffic to try to get into and around that area. DPS asking people, urging people, if you don't have any business in that area, if you're not going there to cover that press conference, please do not use the roadways. Jonathan, you mentioned this shot right there, life flight headed back to Houston. John Armstrong saw that life flight helicopter leaving the scene as he and Sky 13 were on their way to this scene. So we know that at least 3 people had to be taken away from the scene by air ambulance. And the latest, again, numbers that we had gotten from DPS, up to 16, possibly more people injured. And those 3 injuries quite serious enough to require air ambulance to get out there and to take them to hospitals immediately.
And just